Welcome to The Ripple Effect, a podcast series where we dive into international development research and impact. Together, we'll learn about the experience of research from those at the front line and how their experiences are making a difference. Grab your headphones, settle in, and let's get started. Welcome to the second episode of our podcast, The Ripple Effect, brought to you by the Institute for Sustainable Futures, ISF, at the University of Technology, Sydney. Today, I'm your host, Anna Gero, a research director at ISF, coming to you from Gadigal land in Sydney, Australia. Did you know that Australian non-government organisations, ANGOs, working in the international development sector are increasingly required to consider climate action in their operational, programming and policy contexts? That holds even for ANGOs where climate change is not a direct consideration in their work. This episode of our podcast shares details of our recent work with the Australian Council for International Development, ACFID, and focuses on the progress of non-climate focused ANGOs that have made to integrate climate action in their work. ACFID is the peak body for Australian NGOs working in international development. ACFID provides a network which enables its members to be engaged in and informed by dialogue on emerging issues that affects the sector, and climate change is one of those issues. In 2023, ISF developed a learning report for ACFID, which was based on evidence from our research with ANGOs, and this learning report revealed three things about ACFID members. Firstly, ACFID members have a strong appetite for collectively engaging in climate-related conversations and activities. Secondly, ACFID members value learning from practical examples shared by their peers. And thirdly, ACFID members are interested in ongoing upskilling and learning opportunities. So in response to these findings, ACFID designed the Climate Action Peer Learning Program to bring together its members, particularly those who do not have a climate change focus in their programming, to build confidence and capacity in climate action in operations, programming, and policy and advocacy. Now, before I go any further, I'd like to introduce our three guests who join us today.
My name's Anne Fitzpatrick. I'm the Learning and Impact Lead with ACFID, the Australian Council for International Development.
Hi, I'm Ellie Brolly. I'm the Team Coordinator and also the Environmental Focal Point at MSI Asia Pacific.
Hi, I'm Claire Morton, a Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning Advisor at KTF. I'm also chair of our Environment, Climate Change and Disaster Risk Reduction Working Group, which is why I took part in the peer learning program.
Great, thank you, and welcome to Anne, Ellie and Claire. So I'd like to start our conversation off with Anne and ask you briefly to describe the ACFID Climate Action Peer Learning Program, and specifically, why focus on climate action and why peer learning?
Thanks, Anna. And ACFID has climate action as one of our two priority domains. And over the past few years, we've been doing a lot of work in this space in the policy and advocacy area, but also within our code of conduct and learning. Last year, we reached a point where we had revisions to ACFID's code of conduct being finalised that was going to require our members to commit to climate action within their organisational internal operations, and also in their development and humanitarian work. We had developed a few years earlier a climate action framework and a suite of case studies, including many supported by ISF, and other resources to support our members take up an increased focus on climate action. However, our data showed that many of our members weren't aware of the framework and the resources, and that they weren't confident meeting the new code requirements, for some of them not even sort of knowing where to start with taking climate action up in their organisations or projects. So we realised that creating more resources wasn't the answer, and we had to find a way to help our members engage in a meaningful way with the resources we already had available. So we drew on the feedback that Anna mentioned that we'd received from the NGOs in our membership, that they valued hearing from other organisations about approaches that they'd taken and having a safe space to discuss their challenges, ideas and progress. One of ACFID's key functions is to convene our members, and so we did this with the peer learning program. We brought together member NGOs into learning pods of 3 to 4 organisations and provided them with a structured plan of topics based on the climate action framework and accompanying resources for each topic. Each learning pod was autonomous in terms of planning their own meetings and rotating who would chair them and which topics that they would choose to cover and in which order. There was a strong action planning element to the sessions, encouraging participating members to reflect back on their own organisation's practice and what they could implement at the organisational, programmatic and advocacy level. The technical input and content for the whole program, which overall lasted about 3 months, was from a resource hub of curated resources and a few deep dive webinars presented by ISF. And then it was up to the learning pods to digest and discuss these inputs and bring back action plans into their own organisations.
Great. Thanks for that overview, Anne. It brings back memories of working with you over those early stages because, just to provide a bit more background, the role of ISF within the Climate Action Program was in part to provide some technical advice during that design phase. And Anne worked super hard and we were really pleased to be part of that, including providing credible and trusted resources for that resource library and also just that some more technical, climate change, making sure the questions that were posed to the pods for discussion were really thoughtful and helpful for ANGOs. So it was a real pleasure to be part of that design phase. We also helped ACFID in terms of the monitoring, evaluation and learning, and we reviewed the MEL plan. ISF, like Anne mentioned, we facilitated 2 knowledge building webinars, which were really well attended from the peer learning program members, and we led a climate action policy write shop. Actually, there were 2 of those, and they were really well attended, and we heard good feedback from those as well. And we also co-facilitated the final workshop with ACFID, which was hosted at UTS, which was also a really inspiring and well-attended event. So I'd like now to turn to our ACFID member guests and hear from them. I'm sure listeners would love to hear what have been the high points of your experience in ACFID's Climate Action Peer Learning Program. So let's go with Ellie first. Over to you.
Thanks, Anna. So just to give a little bit of context about MSI Asia Pacific and then into the high points. MSI Asia Pacific is an Australian NGO and part of the MSI partnership. Essentially, we work to provide contraception and safe abortion access to vulnerable communities around the world. There's around 20 people in our organisation, and to give you some context of what we were up to before the programme, we certainly had a few of the key mechanisms in place for an environmental focus and wanting to really progress that. Lots of good intentions, such as an environmental focal point and sort of the bare bones of policy. But there was definitely an internal acknowledgement that this was quite siloed, the work we were doing so far. And there was definitely a need to sort of bring the actions into line with best practice and develop what we'd sort of begun, which is where the program came in, which is great. And the high points, I would say for me, certainly coming from a sort of non-technical background with regards to climate action and environmental sustainability, and being the environmental focal point can be quite intimidating. So a key high point for me was just building on that confidence and gaining a good understanding of how to embed that climate action across the organisation, who to work with, and sort of how to weave that into the structure. And working with other organisations in a like-minded group was really important as well, to kind of sense check any ideas before going back to the wider organisation. And if there's time, just for one more point, the sort of focus on resources. As you mentioned, there's a really good resource bank available as part of this program, and the interwoven nature of sort of climate change impact and gender came up quite a lot within that resource bank. And given our work, that was really important and helpful for building my knowledge and sort of my ability to express why our commitment to climate action is so important, and great to do it in a really meaningful way.
Great, thanks, Ellie. And how about you, Claire? What are some high points from your perspective at KTF?
Yeah, thanks, Anna. So for some context, KTF has worked exclusively in PNG for more than 2 decades. We primarily work in remote and rural regions, and our key areas are education, health, equality, and leadership. So we don't have a major focus on climate change, apart from a couple of our solar projects that sit within our education program. And I think similarly to Ellie, our organization was in a very similar starting point with lots of good intentions. I also feel like there was a lot of chatter at lots of events like the ACFID or ANCP events and with other organizations about climate change, particularly after Australia's new international development policy was released. Lots of organizations kind of struggling with not having the expertise in-house or knowing how to go about integrating this within our programming. So I think this program was really well timed. I also agree with Ellie that a major highlight for me was getting to hear directly from other organizations and actually see their program documentation and bouncing off ideas one another and kind of just working through it all together. Also, while I do think my knowledge and understanding of climate change within the sector has improved as a result of the program, I think I now really understand where I sit within this space and where my knowledge gaps are and where our gaps are as an organization. So I think the biggest improvement for me has really been building my confidence and ability to feel a bit more like I know what I'm doing and having the tools and knowing where to find the resources to kind of get in there and do the rest of the work.
Fantastic. Thanks to both of you for those really honest and insightful answers. And I think for me, it really raised, this idea of honesty because, and trusting as well. I think organisations were really trusting of each other. Like you said, Claire, there was a lot of sharing within the pods, and it was a really nice environment in which to be able to do that because of that trust that was built. So the next question I'm really keen to ask is about change creation within your organisation and its programming. And both of you have touched a little bit on this already. How are you implementing the knowledge and understanding you gained from the peer learning program in your current work? Let's start with Ellie again. Thanks.
Thank you. So I will probably focus on the internal operations side of things within the answer, just because this is the area that I focus on at MSI Asia Pacific. So I sort of took this back to the organization, and the aim was to ensure that we kind of baked the commitment to climate action throughout all aspects of the internal operations and also within the governance structure. First of all, taking a few of the kind of recommendations from the learning groups, which were creating a green team working group, which we set that up and worked through the climate action plan. So looking at both the mitigation aspects and the adaptation aspects of climate action. A really key thing was also gaining senior management sponsorship and sort of buy-in from the different teams, which was a key focus of one of the sessions, I believe. We also have now introduced a carbon calculator, which looks at lots of travel data, amongst other things, and also targets, and looking also at cultural change within the staff, across the wider staff as well. So looking at building a resource bank for them. And I must credit the carbon calculator to another one of the participants of our group. As the CEO of Family, she put together this amazing carbon calculator that we were able to adapt to suit our needs, which was great. And obviously a good example of the benefits of the program as well. And all of this work has culminated in us putting together a really solid policy. And this is going to be heading to the board in a couple of months' time for sign off, hopefully an endorsement, which is a really exciting step. And that's filled with these really solid commitments now that are based on evidence and sort of progress within the working group.
Great. And over to you, Claire. It'd be great to hear from you, how you're implementing what you've learned through the peer learning program in your work and your programming as well. Thanks.
Yeah, so we've taken the ideas generated from the program and divided them into two areas: operations / organization, and then programmatic. So Ellie's kind of touched on the organization side. So in terms of programmatic, our working group is kind of focusing on the organizational plans, which include reviewing our policies, tools, and templates, and better integrating climate risk at both the organization and project level. But then programmatic, we're trying to not to reinvent the wheel in a sense. We're trying to build on or amplify things that are already being done in PNG or by experts in the field already, and then better integrate those into our projects. So we've actually split everyone in our Australian office into 5 teams. 2 teams are focusing on integrating climate into our teacher training programs. One group is preparing location-specific training for our healthcare workers. Another group is focused on developing awareness-raising materials to be distributed at all project sites. And then the last team is focused on using tools to calculate our greenhouse gas emissions so that we can kind of create a plan to reduce these over time. Having everyone in the organization get involved has resulted in a lot of buy-in as well. And it's been really fun for everyone at KTF to get a bit creative, as well as to tap into other skill sets and just do things outside of our normal work tasks. So everybody's really taken it on board quite well. We're really excited about things that the teams are doing and how everything's progressed up until this point.
Amazing examples. Thanks. It really, I'm sure Anne's happy inside too. And as someone that's been, playing a part in this peer learning program, it's wonderful to hear. Congratulations to Ellie and MSI on, a draft climate change policy, which is huge. And so good, Claire, to hear about KTF's program, progress, I should say, in integrating climate change across your program and also bringing the organisations along as well. So yeah, really wonderful to hear about that. So turning our attention now to the peer learning model, Anne spoke earlier about why peer learning, and I'd like to dig a little deeper into this and hear from Ellie and Claire too. So ISF's research on the topic of peer learning revealed that academic literature provides evidence of peer learning as an effective method for NGOs to learn about climate change and increase their understanding of climate action. So the research, the literature says that a peer learning approach does a few things. It builds trust between peers, it fosters collaborative relationships, and it also helps to identify pathways to collectively address climate change issues, which accelerates the integration of climate change within NGOs. And I think we've heard some examples and evidence of that from our speakers, Ellie and Claire, just now too. NGOs' appetite to learn through peer learning have been reflected across the different literature, including applied research that we at ISF have undertaken in partnership with ACFID over the past 3 years as well. So there's a lot of evidence that points to peer learning as a useful model, and I think we're increasing that evidence base in this conversation. So Ellie and Claire, I'd like to ask you, what feature of the peer learning model most helped you? And let's start with Claire this time. Over to you, Claire.
Thanks. I think it was probably just the setup. It was really great for each group to be able to pick which sessions they wanted to focus on out of kind of a suite of different topics. There was a lot of self-driven learning that meant you were able to get out of it with whatever you really were able to put into it. But then you also had the group meetings that helped hold you accountable to actually sit down and dedicate time to go through the resources to prepare for your sessions together. And then I think having those resources remain online on the ACFID Climate Resource Hub has been really useful in the long term as well. So I think it's a combination of all these things that were really helpful. And then just being able to collaborate with other organizations was really unique and probably an opportunity that we wouldn't have had otherwise. Also, I know I enjoy just getting to catch up with my group every fortnight, and I feel like the program really broadened my networks and has given me some people to reach out to even now if needed. And I think overall it really built my confidence to continue getting more involved in the sector and also with other organizations.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Thanks, Claire. And how about you, Ellie? What feature of the peer learning model most helped you at MSI?
Well, I'd certainly echo everything that Claire has mentioned. It sounds like we got really similar experiences out of being in different groups there as well. One thing I would just add is that it was quite validating to hear from others in terms of relatable challenges that are being faced, and particularly with areas such as risk. I know Claire mentioned risk as well. Obviously it's a really, really important topic. And when you haven't got the confidence to be kind of getting involved with that aspect of the organization, perhaps it's not part of your key day-to-day work. It was really helpful to understand how others were escalating climate-related risks, embedding that into their current risk process and working with, I'd say, the board and other structures internally. So yeah, those two things I think were the key things about that collaborative process even.
Great. Thanks, Ellie. And how about you, Anne? We know that ACFID is using a peer learning model for a new topic now, for disability inclusion. Could you share with listeners what inspired you and ACFID to adopt this approach?
Yeah, sure. The feedback and data that we took away from the Climate Action Peer Learning program was overall very positive. Participants found that the approach helped them learn and to build organisational capacity, and also it was quite cost effective. And then in a survey we conducted 6 months after the program finished, there was really pleasing data that participating organisations had, since the conclusion of the program, included more climate action into their programs and projects, into their advocacy, and into their internal operations. We also had a number of members ask if we could use the approach for other thematic topics. In particular, disability inclusion seemed to be a pressing issue. Disability inclusion or disability equity is an area we do find that our members are lacking some confidence, but really want to learn more and improve their practice. So we feel it's a good topic to use next in this approach. We're making a few tweaks to how we go about this next program, but we're sticking with that core approach that involves participants from different organisations meeting together to discuss and digest curated resources and to share their challenges, obstacles and opportunities together in a safe space.
Great to hear. It's really wonderful to, obviously learn from past experience and to make changes, to make tweaks and adapt where needed. But really at the core, I think the peer learning model has proven super useful, and it's been wonderful to hear from all our speakers on the podcast today and those really useful examples. So we hope this has been of use to others that might be facing the same challenges that Ellie and Claire faced prior to starting in the peer learning program. If you have any thoughts or questions or would like to follow up or reach out to us, please do. You can reach out to myself, Anna Gero, on LinkedIn or at the UTS Institute for Sustainable Futures at our website. Thank you so much to our three guests today: Anne Fitzpatrick from ACFID, Ellie from MSI Asia Pacific, and Claire from KTF. So please keep in touch with us and join us for the next podcast in our podcast series. Thanks all.